Hiya, I'm Darren Grimes and welcome to Reasoned UK, the channel that asks you to think more and follow less. Do consider hitting that little subscribe button and the notification bell to make sure that you don't miss out on any of our future content, because boy oh boy have we got some fantastic interviews coming up for you over the next couple of weeks. My guest today is Laurence Fox. Laurence is an actor who has been cast out of the Hollywood lefty-lovey club for daring to challenge the metropolitan consensus and liberal values, so-called liberal values. It's a fascinating interview covering everything from his children going through the Marxist education system, the statues being torn down, Black Lives Matter, and Laurence actually calling for the Prime Minister Boris Johnson to actually stand up and fight back as someone who believes in Winston Churchill, as someone who believes in this country, challenge the lazy consensus that this country is a racist backwater when it's nothing of the sort. Give it a listen and let us know what you think in the comment section. Cheers. Hi Laurence.
Hi Darren, how are you doing?
I'm marvellous, thanks. How are you doing?
I'm all right, thanks, yeah.
I'm going to start, if we can, by talking about quite personal things. And there's nothing more personal than politics. But did you grow up in an especially political household?
No, not really. We grew up in a household where we were encouraged to say what we felt, always, by my mum and my dad.
You and me both.
Yeah.
It served as well, Laurence. It served as well.
Yeah, so there was a lot of debating around the dinner table when we were young. But and so that becomes a practice, doesn't it, that you take into life. That's become political now, that expression of that freedom of expression. But it was not political when I was raised. No.
How do you think that? I guess that tolerance, for want of a better word, and actually practicing diversity of thought by being able to speak freely at the dinner table, do you reckon that impacted upon your own politics?
I think it certainly has done, yes, because it becomes a core value, doesn't it? The right to express yourself, and it becomes totally ingrained in your being. And it's only as you get older that you learn to listen in return, rather than just blabbing out your view on the world. So we have a big family and a lot of diverse opinions in that family. If
we talk about you putting your head above the parapet, which you did in quite a bold way, I think it's safe to say. What made you decide to start to speak out, I guess? Because you could have just kept your head down, not really said anything about this culture war that we find ourselves in at the minute, which is getting worse and worse. It's not going to get any better. But you did quite a brave thing and you put yourself out there. What was it that spurred you on? What was it that gave you that drive to actually think, to this, essentially?
I think it was, it began, well, it's twofold. One was the fact that I have two kids, and it concerns me that that freedom of expression is being destroyed, and watching the media sort of slowly woke itself, and the Brett Kavanaugh hearing, and watching what was this believe the victim mentality, which I thought really goes against the very cornerstones of what Western democracy and the legal system are all about. And I was amazed by how on board a lot of people were with that. They were like, yeah, we just have to believe them. And I think, I've had friends and myself to some degree have, been in legal situations whereby the law needs to be examined fully and the situation needs to be examined fully. So, yeah, that's where it kind of came from. And I as far as question time is concerned, I just said what I would have said if I was watching the TV,
Yeah, slightly a bit louder.
Yeah, a bit louder, but with the similar amount of head banging on the table. Yeah.
How bad is sort of self-censorship in the industry? If we think about the entertainment industry in particular, are there those who do actually agree with us, but you reckon are just far too afraid to say so for fear of losing their jobs and having the media whip up hysteria to the same extent that they have done with you?
Yes, I think probably what's happened to me probably serves as a bit of a warning, doesn't it? About voicing an opinion. But no, that we live in a world where I'm sure in the media there is an equal balance, but it's probably a bit tipped towards to the left, the wokey side.
Yeah.
But it's never been a problem, politics, with my friends and with actors. It's not a problem, really. It's a recent phenomenon.
Until now, though, because you wrote for The Spectator, and in it there was an anecdote with someone that I think you used to be friends with. Have I got that right?
I hope that we still will be friends.
Right. Okay. Yes. Absolutely. I mean, I don't know if it can't be a similar thing at all. But I had friends. I was friends with people. One person in particular I can think of from about the age of 11. And then when Brexit was secured, when the British public voted for Brexit, that friend said, really sorry, I can't have anything to do with you anymore. And I'm not working in the entertainment industry. I don't work in Hollywood. So I wonder to what extent this is now seeping out and actually infiltrating, I was going to say ordinary people. I'm probably not. I'm probably a little bit of a weirdo, but you know what I mean. Is this infiltrating other people's lives, do you think?
Yes, I do. I think it's a very concerted drive to change, a huge attack on Western civilization as we know it, and so I think everyone is affected, and there is nowhere to hide anymore because it's out in the open. It feels like, to me.
I mean, do you identify as a conservative there? Just hearing you speak there and talking about the attack on Western civilization itself, and a lot of people talk quite passionately about this almost like suicide of the West taking place at the minute. Do you identify as someone who wants to protect the freedoms and liberties that we once cherished but now seem to be keen to throw out with the bathwater, essentially?
Well, it's a very difficult thing, isn't it? Because you on some issues you can be conservative, and on other issues you can be quite left-wing. For example, I have views on the National Health Service which would be probably more left-wing, and life issues and abortion issues. But I think that it's very easy. I was walking down the road with someone I love the other day, and we were walking past a squat that was being demolished, and they said to me, "You see that? That's your metaphor for life. It's so easy to rip it all down, and it's so much more difficult to put brick on brick on brick and build it back up again." So I'd like to think of myself as someone who's interested in progressive values, but I'm not interested in dismantling things without any good reason that I can see, and certainly not with the excuses that we're being given at the moment. It's what it feels like.
Yeah, I mean, Edmund Burke said, "Rage and frenzy will pull down more in half an hour than prudence, deliberation and foresight can build up in 100 years. And I think that's...
Oh, man.
Yeah, exactly. Very true at the minute, isn't it? Do you have any political idols then?
I'm not really, because I'm kind of new to this game. I was just used to learn lines and do my acting and a bit of singing. So no, I'm starting to get quite into Ronald Reagan at the moment.
Here.
I'm interested in his speeches and the cyclical nature of politics and how it comes around and detoxifies and then becomes much more toxic. So not particularly. I'm one of those annoying people that knows what I don't like ahead of what I know, ahead of knowing what I like.
It's a good place to start. To start. Is there anything then in these early days of finding your political feet, as it were, is there anything that you can think of that if we think about the two main political parties in Britain, what do you like and dislike about each of them?
Well, I'm not sure Labour knows what it is at the moment, but under Corbyn, it was a shit show, wasn't it? And that very denialism of what was going on in regards to anti-Semitism and stuff like that, which I just was astonished by, and. I had faith in Boris, but he seems to have been kicked quite hard by the coronavirus, I have a feeling. Yeah. And also, this is a very, very, it's such a proud movement now, this new progressive movement, that, you do need to be cautious. And I think Boris is probably being a bit overcautious, it feels like to me. I think we should stand up and I mean, either we throw our society away or we maintain and conserve it. So it feels a little bit rudderless at the moment, especially in terms of lockdown and other things like that. And school kids going back to school, it all feels a bit, what's going on here, guys?
Totally. And what do you think about Sir Keir Starmer?
I think he's probably got a good mind, so he could probably stand up to Boris. But he feels a bit rudderless, with the Marcus Rashford thing and the fact that that's the job of Labour, is to do things like that. So I don't know. He's probably finding his feet at the moment, but he seems like the man that will ultimately be able to stand up to Boris.
I mean, you mentioned schools. For me, it's utterly baffling that a so-called progressive party is standing with trade unions in not allowing our kids to go back to school. Like, that to me is just unforgivable. And
it's mad, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, what's your experience, if we turn to the education system then, what is your experience with, because you have, is it just the one child you've got?
I've got two boys.
So two boys. Going through with the education system, are you worried by the sort of Marxist groupthink that is found throughout the education system? Are you worried that they're going to come out as mini Corbyns by the end of it?
Well, fortunately, they get deprogrammed by me on the way home. So, and I'm very keen on things like sitting down at a table and having dinner with my kids. I think that's also something which is slightly leaving our cultural mindset. So I encourage them to debate. And once you open up a child's mind to not believe the first thing they're told, then it becomes a journey for them. So I where they end up is up to them. Mm-hmm. But as long as they, I say you can believe whatever you want to believe, but you just have to tell me why.
Yeah, that's a really good way of putting it.
Yeah, that's what I think.
Has there been anything though that scared you? That have the kids come back from school with anything that you thought, hang on a minute, that's a bit dodgy to be telling my kids?
It's very interesting because you go two different schools. There are two different schools, and one school has its footing firmly in a more traditional vibe, and the other one is a quote unquote progressive school. But both will come home with the odd bit of badly thought out wokery, and I just sort of say, well, what about this? So they all come home saying that Donald Trump is a racist. I mean, that's just stock in trade for children coming home from school. And, they do use the word racist a lot for kids that don't understand what it really means. So I think, the march of the left in the institutions is well documented and worrying.
Yeah.
Isn't it?
Do the kids like Harry Potter?
I'm not sure. They don't watch Harry Potter in my house. I haven't.
Right.
I'm a bit more of a, I point them towards slightly more satirical stuff.
Right, yeah, okay.
Yes.
Well, if we move on to Harry Potter, I'm wondering, do you reckon if there was a statue of J.K. Rowling somewhere in Britain, that the mobs would have attacked that too by now?
Oh, certainly. Certainly they would, wouldn't they? But I think we're at the point where they're dismantling any statue. So statues in themselves are appalling. It's that 1984 thing of removing all history of whatever kind it is. So yes, I think hopefully when the dust settles, if it does settle, people will look back and go, what on earth were you doing? Mm-hmm. What on earth were you lot thinking?
Have you given this much thought? Because I'm thinking of the wild success of the Harry Potter books that gave so much pleasure to so many. Ironically, those same people that allowed J.K. Rowling to achieve the status of a billionaire are now seeking to tear her down. But why do you think an entire generation have become so confused on matters about sexual identity, and I guess identity in general? I've always put it, and I'm not sure what you'll think about this at all, and feel free to disagree, but I reckon that the lacking of the loss of faith in society has meant that we have an entire new generation of people coming forward who are looking for things like Extinction Rebellion. They're looking for things bigger than themselves. They're looking for a value system. They're looking for a belief system. And actually that's why they end up falling for these either neo-Marxist outfits or the likes of Extinction Rebellion.
Certainly, I agree. It's insane to watch these. People are addicted to religion in some way. Whether that we need an outside force, and it's very interesting to watch. The entire sort of white community, if you, for want of a better word, they turn themselves into God, and they're flagellating and crucifying themselves in front of everyone. And absolving other white people of their sin, and it's very, very, very odd. But also, I think there's an element of boredom and privilege in terms of the fact that we are the most free, the most tolerant, and the most liberal society that's ever graced this planet. And they're going, well, we've got to mend something. Something's got to be fixed. And so, what are we going to fix? We're going to fix other people. And it's just a terrible religion. It's a really bad secular religion with none of the stuff that makes religion good, like redemption and forgiveness.
Well, exactly. That's a key principle that I think we've completely forgotten about. You are beyond reproach. Forgiveness has gone completely out of the window, and I find that really, really sad, actually. Mm-hmm. But what would your message be to the likes of the Harry Potter cast who have come out and, I guess, thrown J.K. Rowling to the wolves? I think the only one that hasn't come out and condemned her is probably Neville Longbottom, isn't it? Has he done it yet? Maybe I've missed it.
I don't think Neville has. I've worked with Matt Lewis, actually, and he was a principled dude. I don't know what his views on it are. I think it's we mix up compassion and ideology very badly often. So in regards to transgender rights and things like that, I think most people are on side with those, with bringing people together. But then there's this much harder, firmer element to it, which is these people are women or are men, and that's more of a ceding the linguistic territory and the language. I think, especially seeing as English is the mother tongue and is being exported around the world, it is up to the English and the British and English speaking people around the world to preserve their language. And saying something is true that a vast proportion of people don't believe is true, I think there's an element of them saying, well, look, of course we need to show compassion to the movement and to the individuals who are transgender and do need focus and love, but also to say at the same time there's an ideological war that goes on behind transgenderism, goes on behind Black Lives Matter, goes on behind Extinction Rebellion, and it's hijacking these Marxist values hidden under the skirts of these very, very noble causes. And I think it's important that people stop and think about it just for a minute. And I don't think that makes you a bigot or a racist or a fascist or whatever they throw at you for not agreeing. Just inquiring minds and keeping the debate going without hating people and throwing them all away.
Yeah, because if you take those two things in particular, on the trans question, I have nothing but respect and admiration for those who make what must be an impossibly hard decision to, in some cases, you could be married, you could have children, you could be very young, make the decision to live your life in a way in which, changes your entire identity. That is the concept behind it. There can be nothing braver than that. But at the same time, we can't end up in a scenario in which sex-segregated spaces, the identity of women, and actually the identity of gay people as well, because if sex doesn't exist anymore, then by definition, same-sex relationships don't exist anymore. All of these things start to fall apart, and that's when you start to get into really sort of neo-Marxist territory where they want to just tear down all of these definitions and, as you put it, the language that we built up and I guess societal boxes that we've all been put in for obvious reasons just start to tumble down. And as far as Black Lives Matter is concerned, it's a very laudable aim, of course. Who could disagree with the idea that Black Lives Matter? Of course they do. But at the same time, this is a Marxist outfit that wants to defund the police and bring down capitalism and the state. It says so on its UK fundraiser that's raised almost £1 million. You know, it's these things that you just want people to actually think about for longer than 2 seconds and get away from the vacuous platitudes that people spout.
Well, it's very interesting, isn't it? Because there's nothing more privileged than adopting the position of I am going to atone for this terrible sin. It's a very entitled way of behaving, actually. So the virus of this horrible Marxism that's coming through, it relies on our entitlement and our privilege and our compassion. And it's so, you know, I imagine 90% of the people that are involved in this thing are literally going on those three words. Black Lives Matter, which we, as you say, is absolutely a laudable cause. We can all believe in Black Lives Matter. What we don't necessarily have to believe in is the ideology behind it. And they've been working hard to find out how to get right into culture and really dismantle it. And actually, I think race is going to be the ACE2 receptor, if you will, of how the virus gets into the culture, because it's very, very difficult. No one wants to be called a racist. People are very sensitive about race, particularly in Britain, because of our colonial history. And, you know, we have committed some grave wrongs around the world, but also we have mended great wrongs around the world. And, you know, it's a bad faith argument to think that it's not, it's also on the shoulders of white people that slavery ended. And it's on the shoulders of white men that universal suffrage came, you know. So it's not, if we look at the world and our developing culture in such a negative light, it feels very spoilt, very vindictive, very hateful, very disrespectful to both of my grandfathers, one of whom died with shrapnel in his shoulders, you know, fighting for our freedom. And I'm like, nah, I'm not into that.
Yeah. I mean, how do you think the UK then should talk about its history? Because you put it really well there. If your kids ask you, for example, if they say, is the UK's history a net good or a net bad? You know, how would you answer that question? Surely there's a way in which we put it without saying, you know, the UK is a racist backwater, blah, 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 which is just clearly not the case.
Well, it's not the case, and it's growing even more progressive and tolerant and wonderful. We've got a cabinet filled with BAME people. You know, America's had its last president was black. You know, we're not. I think it's very, very odd. What would I say? I would point to the great things that we've done and the terrible things that we've done, and then I'd also I encourage people to look into their own hearts of the great things that they've done and the terrible things they've done. And again, this is where forgiveness and progress comes from. This offence archaeology and cancel culture that people think is, you know, was described as histrionic yesterday, is not that way. People are developing beings. This conversation is a developing conversation. Our positions aren't set in stone. We have to discuss, and it seems to me that there is not much discussion coming from the other side. And when someone doesn't have an argument, and they try and bully you into their position by exploiting either your compassion or what they perceive as your bigotry, then I think you have to be very, very wary. So I would say to my children, yes, this man traded slaves, and yes, and slavery is no longer part of Western civilization, you know, but there would be those that would have you believe that our society is more corrupt than ever, and I just don't believe them. No, there's no evidence for it, so I can't support an argument with no evidence.
Your Question Time appearance, where you were criticised for being a white, was it a white straight male or a white privileged male?
I don't think they got me into my sexuality. I think it was a privileged white male.
Okay. Or cisgender or something. It could have been a multitude of sins. But, Laurence, do you think one of the things I find the most offensive about that sort of rhetoric is, I look at my two brothers back home in County Durham, right? You're both younger than me. And I think this idea of them having white privilege is so incredibly racist. And I'll just explain why. I look at both of them, both without their dads, both the grandsons of a miner, both victims of the COVID economic crash, both in and out of precarious work. And I just wonder, for the life of us, and I've thought about this long and hard, what evidence of white privilege is there with lads like that?
It's a very unhelpful term. My best mate is is a man right on the poverty line, and has really struggles with financially and emotionally, actually, often, and he has zero privilege, and I think it's a very racist way of talking to somebody. I think highlighting colour, it's when the minute somebody says, speaking as a black woman, or speaking as a white heterosexual male, or speaking as a brown homosexual female, whatever, I think straight away I'm like, well, I've just lost who you are, because I've zero interest in what colour your skin is, or who you decide to go to bed with. It just doesn't bother me. I want to know what's going on in your heart, and whether you're trying to bring a positive game to this world.
Also, though, surely it's utterly deranged that we find ourselves in the situation where the admittedly grotesque murder of a black man in the United States has sparked calls for mass apologies, self-flagellation and bending of the knee by an entire ethnic group in this country. I just find that utterly farcical. Of course you can, again, going back to those laudable aims of Black Lives Matter, we can all say that, we can all agree with that. But what I won't agree with is this bending of the knee nonsense that I think actually does start to get into racist territory itself.
Well, it doesn't feel like a gesture of solidarity. Certainly to someone from British culture, it feels like a gesture of subservience, surrender, submission. It doesn't, honour, I suppose, in a way, in terms of the monarch. But at the same time, if you wish to take a knee and that is how you wish to express yourself with your feelings about Black Lives Matter, then by all means do. I'm just not going to do that ever. Mm-hmm. Because I think it's appalling, actually. But that's my view, and I totally, again, would fight to the death for someone's right to do it should they want to do it. I'm just not going to do it myself. We need to focus on the individual, because it's individuals working together that create change. It's not collectivization that creates change. We've got 100 million dead people to give us evidence of that not working.
If we go back to the statues, I don't know if you saw, but at the weekend, the Justice Secretary came out with new proposals for greater powers to sanction people for criminal damage of national monuments and things like that, which we've obviously seen over recent weeks with attacks on the cenotaph and obviously Sir Winston Churchill as well. Now, there are already these powers. The police already have these powers. That is criminal damage, that is a criminal act. I'm wondering, Laurence, if you've got any thoughts on why it is. I think the real question for me here is, why is the law not being enforced as it is and actually being selectively applied to those that our politicians and upper echelons of the police force seem to agree with? Because social distancing measures, gatherings of more than 6 people, is illegal, right? Mm-hmm. But it seems to me that the police have just turned a blind eye to this, or actively encouraged it.
I wonder whether people are picking their sides already, because it feels like that's what's coming. So I wonder whether people are saying, look, no, I was good in that situation. I did the right thing. Can you please not come for me? I think the police have done pretty well, haven't they? Bearing in mind, I anticipated that this would kick off, and the police get a hard time as it is. It's a very difficult job being a policeman and maintaining law and order. And they're very heavily scrutinised for doing it. I think it's a very difficult position. Ultimately, what they want is peaceful protest. And if someone wants to go and stand on the cenotaph and try and burn the Union Jack, then it's up to the rest of us to condemn them and support the police. But I think the police don't feel they're 100% supported by the community. I feel we're in flux. It feels very much like we're in flux. And actually, with the more people that can stand up and say, no, I really value that monument. Please, don't touch it. And then we don't have to rely on, some really, really drunk far-right EDL people to protect it. But it's very interesting that, they've got footballers taking the knee in empty football stadiums. And that feels to me like a stamp on the face of the British working man as well, because I imagine if those stadiums were full of people, you'd find a lot less footballers taking the knee. Do you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. I really think so. This sort of honour by the back door, it's right in government, and it's everywhere. It's years and years and years of this takeover has been, and now the flower is starting to blossom. and we're all, some of us, waking up and going, no, this is not the garden I want to live in.
Yeah, I mean, I do agree with you that the police do a phenomenal job, and I think that applies to the vast majority of them. But I do wonder if a minority that wants to try and, basically, you can't negotiate with a lion when your head is in its mouth, and I feel like there's been a lot of appeasement to these groups that we are now having to challenge and the ideas of, because if we look at the facilitation of these illegal demos to appease these Marxists, right? If we look, and they want to defund the police, no less, or making TikTok videos at pride festivals, instead of actually working to keep the streets safe from those that seem intent on taking us back to the 8th century. You know, it's that strikes me as the problem. If you start to give these people too much ground, they'll just want more and more and more.
Yeah, that comes from leadership, though, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And ultimately, you need someone at the top of government who turn around and go, this is what we are, this is what our culture is, a conversation. And currently, the place we're in the conversation is that we honour, while recognising what Winston Churchill's flaws and failures, we honour the fact that this man pretty much, with the help of some extremely brave young men and women, outnumbered hugely by the Germans, kept them away from our country and kept us free, and we honour that memory, and that's where we are in that conversation at the moment. But it's a leadership issue. It needs to come from the top of government, and it needs to be not wishy-washy. It needs to be, this is my position on it. We don't wrap Churchill up in a big wooden cage. It's, you go near that, you go down, you're going to jail, chum. That's what happens. This is our shared national monument. You're defacing my identity as well, and our national identity. And the national identity is the most safe way we've managed to, the nation state is the most reliable way we've managed to create so far in Western society to stop mass murder and stuff. So I currently am in a position of going, but it would be really inspiring if Boris stood up and said something about this. And he spoke for the millions of people that love and live in this country who aren't on Twitter, and who aren't constantly whining at everybody else. I get letters from people all the time about this, and I get stopped in the street quite a lot nowadays. It's a shame. You would have hoped I was stopped in my street for my acting, but I get stopped in the street by quite a lot of people saying, "Thank you very much for saying what I wanted to say, but don't have the platform to say." So, I don't see myself as a representative of the working man, but I do think that it's top-down leadership. And then the police will do it. They know that there's E2R on their helmets, right? So it's also the Queen. And, we're at a crossroads in our society, and there are people trying to push us over.
It's about those it's about that shared identity, those national symbols, as you just mentioned, Her Majesty the Queen, that brings together all 4 constituent parts of the United Kingdom, but also every race, sexuality, class, gender, whatever, brings us all together. So I think your cut through is quite easily explained, though. I think it's because you have done something very brave and admirable, but you're saying things that the vast majority of people who, you are absolutely right, do not populate Twitter, do not enjoy vegan meals, are actually quite proud to be British, quite like the country, quite like Sir Winston Churchill, quite like the cenotaph. Don't think our history is one of oppression entirely, and we have actually done quite a lot of good in the world and continue to do quite a lot of good in the world. And you're saying all of these things, and as an actor, and you don't hear that anywhere near enough. So that's why you've had cut through. I think you should be very proud of what you've managed to do, because you've built up and definitely channeled a lot of energy of people who are so, I was about to swear there, who are so fed up of this nonsense.
Yeah, I think I don't know why I do it, but I know that it feels like I have to do it. So, and also once that question time thing kicked off, I was, you cannot, the other thing with these extreme leftists is you can't argue with them. So they don't want to argue with you. and they won't listen to your point of view. So what you have to do is just maintain your position. You conserve the situation, don't you? That's the point of it, and that's our job. Seemingly, it's to stretch out the time between now and the next revolution, and try and make sure that there's a due process and a democratic process that takes place if we're to during the long conversation about how we want our society to evolve, which we do. And the UK definitely needs to have a very long conversation with itself in regards to its colonial past and all of these sorts of things, and slavery. But to in America, but to pretend that slavery originated in America, as is often said by these extreme leftists, is absolute rubbish. And it's like, just read half a history book, and
Absolutely.
and you'll know. But it's a very noble thing. It's like slavery. It's much more complicated than that. And slavery wasn't also the preserve of the white man. And I hate having to use the words white and black all the time nowadays. It's so really bad. And then you've got some guy flies a plane over. Yeah, and they fly a plane over Burnley going "White Lives Matter" over the football stadium over the Etihad last night, and it's a crime. And there will be a proportion of the public that sat there going, hang on a minute, we've had Black Lives Matter solidly now for weeks and weeks and weeks, and someone flies over a plane saying White Lives Matter, whether it's in good taste or childish or racist. Look, it's a conversation, but to immediately denounce this. And, there's some pushback now with All Lives Matter, and how All Lives Matter can be seen as a racist dog whistle, I'm yet to work out. It's a pretty much a core tenet of Judeo-Christian values. So, and as far as I can tell, those are the values that I'm subscribed to, and we've done the best in the world with those values, and long may they continue.
Absolutely. I mean, it's very optimistic, Laurence, to assume that come the next revolution, you and I won't be in a gulag.
Well, the best thing is that we'll probably be dead, but who will be in the gulag? Gary Lineker.
Ah.
Because it's a fight to the top, isn't it? It's a fight to the top of wokeness. So it's like ISIS. You've got to be the best terrorist to be the top of ISIS, in the same way you've got to be the most woke to be at the top of woke. So they all chop their own heads off in the end, don't they? And we'll be long gone. We will have been in the first wave.
Well, absolutely. But hey, I tell you what, I wouldn't mind Gary Lineker's pay packet.
I don't pay it anymore, fortunately. I privately defunded the BBC in my own head.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Why are you so passionate about that movement, about defunding the BBC?
Because they're not impartial, and it's in their charter to offer impartial news. And I mean, I can put up with Jon Snow lionising this Islamic terrorist who stabbed 3 innocent unarmed men in the neck and under their arms, and I can vaguely put up with Jon Snow doing that, but I don't wish to be told what to think by the BBC. It's not in their remit, and it's got worse and worse and worse. So defund them or you pay for it.
I'd sell off both of them.
What's so mad, there are some great parts of the BBC and there are some wonderful journalists, so I have to caveat it, but what's so mad is they're pandering to the audience that don't pay the licence fee. Mm-hmm. The people that pay the licence fee are people like my dad, and he doesn't watch it anymore. So yeah. It's insane. The BBC
Are you a bit
have got
worried about what comes next after we defund the BBC though? Because if we think about the regulations that actually police this stuff, Ofcom is perceived to have a very pro-liberal metropolitan bias. So we might, and because of those regulations that are in place, you couldn't have say, Sky News Australia, which is so bloody sound. I love watching them.
I know.
But if you think about all of those things, there couldn't be an operator like that, a broadcaster like that in this country because of those pervasive regulations. Are you concerned about what comes next after the BBC? It might actually be worse than what we've got now, or do you just not care? Just do it. Get it.
I think the in the very flawed systems of life, the free market is probably the best system the free market has lifted people out of poverty. It's lifted many more people out of poverty than any other system has, and it's flawed and it's wrong. But the BBC is operating in an environment which is not fair. They're monopolising an environment. They've got £3 billion+ a year from the taxpayer, and I think that the free market will balance itself out, and you'll probably get a more right-wing news distributor for people to choose, and it'll probably go the way of the American system, which is highly polarized. But it's effective, the American system, in that way. I mean, other than the fact that it polarizes the country, but we're very polarized anyway. So I think we would benefit from some more impartial reporting.
And consumers could probably then make choices about whether or not they want to watch Little Britain.
God forbid. God forbid. God forbid that we've actually got brains.
I know. Or can see that it's purely satirical. Right, we've covered
They should move it. They should move the BBC. They have moved the BBC, a lot of it out, but they should move Parliament out of London for a periods of time as well. They should move everything out of London for a period of time. We live in a very mobile nation, and you should go, because when I go up north, and I've worked up north frequently, and I was born up north actually, so when I go and hang out up there, it's a totally different, people think in a very, very different way, and they're just patronised and condescended to by the mainstream media day after day after day.
I have to go back home as often as I can, just for sanity, to be honest, just to be reminded that people are normal up there and don't operate in the way in which they do down here in London. Right, we've covered quite a lot of ground now, and I don't want to alarm you, but I'd like to do a quick fire, multiple choice.
Oh God.
Yeah.
Okay.
Question and answer. Okay.
Okay.
Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Right. Brexit 4 years on, good or bad?
Well, it's not happened, has it? So bad.
The United States of America or the European Union?
United States of America.
Are you a British subject or a citizen of the world?
I'm a British subject.
Immigration too high or too low?
Needs regulating, needs managing.
Taxes too high or too low?
Oh, I don't know at the moment. I feel like I pay a lot of tax, but I actually get quite a lot for my tax. I'm quite grateful for the taxation system. Yeah, I get a lot of support, so I'm grateful.
Tax burdens at a 50-year high. Lockdown, right or wrong?
Wrong. Initially right, now wrong.
Margaret Thatcher, hero or villain?
Hero.
Net zero by 2050, achievable or bankrupting?
Bankrupting.
Hollywood, woke or broke?
Both.
There
are great people in Hollywood, though.
Yeah.
Binary is difficult on it, but there are some great people in Hollywood. But some of that I'm responsible thing, I wanted to tear my eyes out and boil them in a saucepan.
This one, it has I'm afraid you're not allowed any other option than amazing. But Reasoned UK, amazing or amazing?
Oh, amazing, absolutely bloody amazing.
I thought you might say that. Laurence Fox, thank you very much for joining me today. I'm sure everyone will agree that was fantastic.
Thanks, Darren.
Reasoned is a grassroots organisation that relies on support from people like yourself who want us to continue producing our free-thinking, high-quality content. You can rest assured whatever you donate, big or small, will be put back into ensuring we win the battle of ideas. Thank you for your support.